Hey everybody, hope you're doing well. My name is Christopher Breeden, and today I'm going to be walking you through sort of the basics on how to create survey research in Qualtrics, and then how to distribute that survey through our SONA platform here at UA. So I imagine that this video may serve some pedagogical functions for new incoming graduate students, new faculty, or faculty that are sort of transitioning to survey research and perhaps don't feel as comfortable with the mechanics of Qualtrics or the mechanics of our SONA participant collection system. So hopefully this video can serve those populations and anyone else really that sort of needs a refresher on how to work through Qualtrics and SONA. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the very basics of these two systems and sort of show you what I think are the best practices for creating methodical and easy to implement research. So the first thing that we're going to do, presumably when you get here at UA, you won't have a Qualtrics account active. So you're actually going to need to activate your Qualtrics account, and you'll do that by emailing the Office of Information Technologies for College of Arts and Sciences. Of note, graduate students and faculty members, they cancel your Qualtrics account every summer. So if you need access to Qualtrics over the summer, you're going to have to email them and ask them to turn off the automatic expiration date. Don't worry, it saves all of your surveys and things like this, but it is kind of annoying. So let's assume that you have emailed Information Technologies and you have your Qualtrics account. So we're going to go ahead and log into Qualtrics here. And sort of this screen, there's a lot going on here. But you can see on the side that we have an organization scheme here that I use. I like to organize it by year. So you can see I have fall 2018, 2019, these types of things. And what you can do is you can create superordinate categories to then stick your surveys into. But we're going to create a new project today. And we're going to create a new survey. And we're going to name this survey Test for Qualtrics and SONA Demonstration. So we click Get Started. All right, so this is basically what the Qualtrics platform looks like. There's a lot of things going on this screen, and I'll give you sort of some of the basics here. We have survey, actions, distributions, data analysis, and reports. Really, the only thing that you're going to mess with up here is you're going to be in the survey window to sort of build and craft your study. You may go to the data and analysis window to get sort of preliminary looks at how participants are responding to your study. This is also where you would export the data to some other platform for data analysis. So if you were interested in exporting a finished survey, you would click here, click Export Data, and then follow the prompts on the following screens to export it either into Excel or SPSS. And then here are just some basic reports that Qualtrics tries to conjure on your data for you. So really basic things like the number of participants that are selecting this response, no significance testing or anything like that. But we're going to spend most of today in this survey screen. So what we're going to do here is we are going to make our first block, and that's what these larger sections are called. They're called blocks. So Qualtrics operates in blocks and questions. Blocks house many questions. Questions are individual. So for this first block, we're going to go ahead and name it consent. Okay. And we're going to go here to the question name and name it consent as well. The reason that this is important is because this question name is what would appear in an SPSS file. So when you have an SPSS file from this data, the name of this variable will be whatever you've named it here. So we've named this consent. You could theoretically name this anything. You could name it score 1, or if it's your gender question, you could name it gender, or any of these types of things. So what we do here is we click here, and we can change the question type. So we're gonna look at all these question types very quickly here. We have descriptive text and graphics. These are basically where you would insert a picture. You have multiple choice, text entry, matrix table. This is your standard Likert or Likert type question. Here's some of the fancy things that Qualtrics can do. You can give them a slider with a smiley face, or you can give a heat map if you're doing some sort of eye tracking data. You can have questions, timing questions that show you how long participants spend on a certain question, or that prevent them from advancing past a certain question until a specific time limit has been met. So what we're going to do here is we're going to make this a descriptive text, because this is our consent form, and we'll click here. Now, you really always want to edit it in the rich content editor. You can work here, but it makes some weird functional problems sometimes. So it's better just to go into the rich content editor. So here we're going to type our consent form. And we're going to make it bold. And we are going to highlight it so that people have to look at it. Oh, that's not highlight. That's... Here we go. I'm going to make it like that and make all the text black. And you can only do these things here in the content editor, this highlighting and stuff like that. That's why we're in here. So here's our consent form. And notice over here, we have validation types. So what we're going to do after this is we're going to add a new question. So we're going to click this green arrow right here to add a new question. We're going to call this question consent.1. And we're going to make it, do you consent to my research? Notice I didn't go into the rich content editor, which is fine. Qualtrics automatically generates some responses for you. So notice that it gave me 5 choices here. We can up the choices or decrease them. If we want them to be yes, no, we'll put it down to 2. We can make it 5. But it also gives you automatic options here of what it thinks are sort of the opposite poles of whatever type of question you're asking. So we'll leave it yes, no. We're only going to allow them to answer one question, so they can only provide one answer. This positioning, we could have it horizontal to where it'll look like that, but we want it vertical. This is an important one here. This is where you force response. So what this does is it makes it so that participants cannot advance past this screen if they've left any questions unanswered. So you'll have to check with your IRB to see if you allow that kind of responding. Typically, yeah. So right here is where you would click if you want to make sure that you have no missing data in your survey, because participants cannot advance past a specific question or block of questions until they force response here. Okay? So we're going to put that there, force response, and so now our consent block is done. We could add another question, but we're going to add a new block, because the way you want to think about Qualtrics is you want all the related content to be in the same block, so that when you move to the survey flow, which is the section of Qualtrics that allows you to craft how participants are going to move throughout your survey, you want all the related information to be contained together. So we're going to create a new block. We're going to call this block Survey Questions 1. So here we're going to create a new question, and it is going to be a Likert type question. So we're going to make it a matrix table. And we're going to go to the rich content editor. And we're going to say, please rate the extent to which you agree or disagree with the following statements. Classic psychology research. Okay, the first statement is number 1. Psychology is awesome. And then we're going to do I like psychology. And then finally, we're going to put Roll Tide. So what we're going to do here is we're going to change the scale. We're going to have the number of statements. We could add more statements if we want. Notice how when I click this, it adds more statements down here. But we're fine with 3 statements. We can also increase the scale points. So if we want a more sensitive scale, we can increase it from 3 to 5 or 7. And what we can do here is we can click on the box above the points, go to the rich content editor, and we can put in strongly disagree 1. Now the thing about Qualtrics is everything that you do, Qualtrics recognizes. So for example, if I was to put in 2 returns right here, Qualtrics would recognize that as 2 returns. and it will make this box look fundamentally different than this box, which is somewhat disagree, yet I've only returned once. So we can see here that these two questions look different, and they will look different for the participants as well. So you got to be really methodical and somewhat mechanical that you're consistent across all of your different things here. And we're just going to put 3 here. Let's say you weren't interested in providing qualifying anchors for each of these. You can just tab over, and it'll automatically give them to you. Okay. So let's go over here and check our question-relevant functions. We want participants to give one answer. We want this to be mobile-friendly so that participants can take our survey on their phones. What this does is it changes the way in which Qualtrics displays the question to them so that it fits their phone. You could position the text above and see this changes the position of the questions. You can have it repeat headers. This is critical. Let's say you had a question that contained very many statements. So we're going to put this up to 9 or 10. It's possible that these statements bleed off of participants' screens, which means that they won't have direct access to your headers. So what you want to do is you want to repeat the headers so that every so often it redisplays your anchors. And you can position them in the middle, the bottom, both. I always do middle so that every 4 or 5 questions, they get your anchors and your qualifiers right there. Again, we're going to force response here. Now, let's say that we needed a custom validation. Let's say that we had some sort of attention check in here. Right here, let's put, if you are answering thoughtfully, please respond with 2. Okay? Let's say that we are of the discipline that believes that attention check questions should be answered correctly in order to prevent participants from proceeding in your study, right? So they have to answer a number 2 here, or the survey won't let them proceed. Instead, it'll give them an error prompt that forces them to realign their attention on the question, find out what the error is, and move forward. Let's say we wanted to do that. We would click Custom Validation here, and we would go to question 3. Notice we haven't named it yet, so it will be question 3. And we want to scroll down and find the item that we just made. If you are answering thoughtfully, here it is. So if that question is equal to 2, because that's the value we prescribed, validation will pass, which means it'll let them pass. If it doesn't, we're going to give them a system default error text. Done. So unless they answer with number 2, it will give them a red box that says, hey, you've answered incorrectly. You can also create custom error texts, so you could have it say whatever you want, but we use the system default. Okay. Best practice, let's go and name this. Let's name it Likert type. Okay. And let's say that we want it to randomly present these questions. We're going to click on Advanced Question Options, and we're going to go to Randomization. Now, this is how you randomly randomize within question. Okay, so we're going to randomize the order of all choices. There's also advanced randomization that you can use, and you would use this if you had some sort of secondary scheme to your randomization, such that you needed this question first, and then a series of questions, and then another specific question and a series of questions. You could set that all up here under advanced randomization. But for us, we're just going to randomize the order of all choices, which means that all of these options are going to be presented randomly and equally. All right, so now we're going to create another question. But for this question, we're going to import. A friend of ours was nice enough to share some of his or her research, and we have access to their surveys. So what we can do is we want to include the NPI in our research. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go search for NPI, which is the Narcissistic Personality Inventory, and a colleague of mine has shared that with me, so I don't have to program it. Also, they may have built syntax in SPSS that corresponds to the labels that they have given the MPI in their study. So we really just want to copy their Qualtrics information so that there's no confusion when data analysis happens. So we're going to click this here, and we're going to, well, it looks like the MPI is not in that one. Let's try this one. Here we have the MPI 16. So we're going to click this whole box, and I cannot stress this enough. It is very important that you keep question export tags. What this does is it allows these questions that I'm importing into my survey to come over with their appropriate labeling scheme. If I don't do this, I will import all the formatting for the questions, but I will not import their labeling scheme, so that when I go to run my colleague's syntax in SPSS, I will have errors. So make sure you do this here. And we're going to import these 16 questions. Notice they've come over with their appropriate label, whatever my colleague had labeled them in his or her data file. Okay, so now we have the MPI in here. What we're going to do is we want to randomize within our block. Right? So not only do we want to randomize the choices of this specific question, but within this block, we want to randomize the presentation of all questions. So we're going to go to question randomization, and we're going to randomize the order of all questions. Alternatively, we could set up advanced randomization to where we would put things over here or here to create different subsets so that it randomizes within those smaller subsets. Really just think of this screen as more advanced randomization. Anything is possible with Qualtrics, you just have to know how to do it. And if it involves randomizing questions within the same block, it likely happens in this screen. For us, we're just going to randomize the order of all questions. Okay. We're going to create 2 more blocks here. We're going to add this block. We're going to call it Survey Questions 2. It really doesn't matter what type we put in here, but just for demonstration, let's make this a rank order question. So we want them to rank order, and we'll go to the Rich Content Editor. Please rank order these things in terms of awesomeness, and we want awesomeness to pop off the screen for participants. So we're going to write Star Wars, Tua Tagovailoa, nailed it, and we are going to say Taco Mama. All right, so we want to rank order these 3 things here, and we're going to remember to label this. So we're going to label it questions.2. Here, again, best practices. Let's go over and make sure it's forced response. We don't have any custom validation that matters. But we do want to have 2 types of questions in this. But we do not want participants to have access to both types of questions at the same time. So we're going to add a page break here. And we want to make sure that participants spend at least 10 seconds on this page. So what we're going to do is we're going to add another question below this, but before the page break. And this question is going to be a timing question. So we're going to call this timing 1. And over here we have the options. We will enable submit after 10 seconds. So that means that we don't want participants to be able to spend any less than 10 seconds on this page. You can also auto advance it, which means if they zone out, you can automatically push them past this page. You can also choose to show them this timer. So you can really do a lot of things here with timing. So we've got that set up. We're going to create a new question here, which is a second rank order question. Maybe we want them to rank order them again. In terms of, let's say, instead of awesomeness, it's functionality. So we'll have the same items again. Star Wars, Tua, and Taco Mama. And remember, let's call this guy questions 3. Okay. Same thing here. We want a force response. There you go. All right, so our survey is getting built. We have our consent form. We have our first set of personality questions. We have our variables of interest. And now we're going to add our debriefing. Debriefing/demographics. Okay. So what we're going to do now, we've got all of our blocks that we need in the study. What we're going to do now is we're going to go set the order in which participants are going to view our study. And we do that in survey flow. So here on this screen, we can do a lot of things. This is where you create the functional roadmap that participants will travel through in your study. So what I mean is, if I was to move demographics here, where it is on the screen dictates the order in which participants view that information in your study. So this survey flow would have participants view the debriefing, then the consent, then survey questions 1 or 2, and then it would be over. Okay, that's obviously not what we want, so we're going to move these things into the order that we want them to be. We'll move the consent form first, the debriefing last, and survey questions 1 or 2 there. There's a lot that you can do on this screen. We can add some elements. If you delete something from your survey flow screen, it is no problem. You can recall it right here with the block. Okay, so this is where you would type in blocks by name. The branch function is interesting. It's a logic statement that triggers conditions. So for example, we would show them the consent form. Then we would branch if, let's say if this question on the consent form is displayed. Let's say if they consent to the research, they choose no. They select definitely not. Is selected. So if the consent form question is selected as definitely not, okay, if that happens, then we will do this. We'll send them to the end of the survey. If they choose not to participate, then they automatically reach the end of the survey. Okay? So then nothing else would happen for this participant. However, if this condition is not met, then we would go from this block, which is consent, down the functional ladder to this next step. Cool. Let's say we have this next step. Everybody chooses to participate. We're going to add below a randomizer. What this means is that we, here, let's actually move this up. After the consent form, now we want the randomizer. What this means is that it will randomly present however many of the following elements. So what that means is we're going to put the survey questions 1 and survey questions 2 in here. So the way this survey flow now reads is that after consent, if they agree to consent, it'll come down here to this randomizer and it'll randomly present the 2 blocks that you have. This prevents order effects. This could be how you distribute evenly across conditions in your study. So let's presume that you have 2 conditions in your study, and each one of these blocks represents a functional variant of the items in your study that correspond to those conditions. You would randomly present 2 of them and evenly present those elements. Make sure you click this evenly present elements box. What this is going to do is it's going to randomly present however many you want. So for our survey, we want it to randomly present both of these items. If you had a condition, a between subjects factor, you would randomly present 1 of the following elements. And what that'll do is it'll give some participants condition A, some participants condition B. Sounds good. Finally, after they satisfy this randomizer criteria, they will go to this debriefing block, and they'll receive the debriefing. Important to know in the debriefing, participants are sometimes, by the time they get to the end of the study, they're less attentive than they were at the beginning of the study. So it's rather important to include a question in big, bold letters that says you must advance past this screen to automatically receive credit. Inform them somehow that they need to go all the way to the end until Qualtrics gives them the final UA scripted prompt, okay, you're done now, before they receive credit. Because of the way SONA operates, which I'll show you somewhat now. One of the most important things in this study screen is to include a participant ID number. So we're going to click Add Below this green embed data text, and we're going to call it ID. What this is going to do is it's going to assign every participant in your study a unique identification number. We're going to go ahead and put this up to the top of the study, so it's the first thing that happens, so that when you download your data, you'll get all of the longitude, latitude, date accessed information. Then the first thing you'll get will be this participant ID number. This ID number is essential for at least a few reasons. One, this is one of the only ways that you can distinguish participants' data from other participants' data. Second, this is the only way besides taking your data file and corroborating it with the time of access in SONA to be able to distinguish whether participants participated in your study more than once. So it's often that participants will click on studies, start it, leave, come back, start the study again, leave, get distracted, come back, start the study, and finally take it for the first real time. And you need to be able to identify in your data file those instances from the same participant. And this is how you do that with this ID value. Finally, this ID value is how you will assign credit to participants in an easy way if you choose not to use the automatic credit function. So we're going to save this flow, and then we're going to go preview our study. So we have our study the way we want it, and we want to preview it to make sure that there's no errors. Of note, you can also preview specific blocks by clicking this block, options, click the view block, and then you can preview the blocks. This will let you make sure that your blocks are behaving appropriately with respect to randomization or sort of logic statements that you have dealing with the ways in which the blocks are displayed. You can do that here as you're crafting the blocks without having to view the entire survey. But our survey is done, so we're going to click preview here. Okay, so this is what it will look like to participants. So here, we are going to, do I consent to the research? I'm going to check to see if my authentication worked. Do I consent to the research? I chose not to answer anything, and it gave me the error text. Well, so I guess I have to answer this question. Yeah, I'm going to choose definitely not. So now I get the thank you for participating. So it looks like my survey logic where I told it that if participants do not consent, kick them to the end of the survey, it looks as if that works. So that's been checked. Let's go to restart the survey. Yes, I'll participate in your research. Let's make sure that all these questions are forced response so that people cannot advance past appropriate with your IRB these questions, and it looks like they all are correct. So I'm just going to click random answers here so I can get past this screen because it looks like my validations are correct on this screen. Okay. Looks like I still missed something. So see, it says issue. What did I miss here? It's my attention check. So it caught that I didn't select number 2, which means that my attention check is working correctly. So let's go ahead and click number 2 so that it lets me get past this screen. And indeed it does. Now I'm at the end of the survey. Everything looks good. Okay, so it looks like the study is correct and ready to go. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go to the survey options and deal with some of the things here. What's most important on the survey options is that you click Prevent Ballot Box Stuffing, which prevents people from taking the survey more than once, ostensibly. It's a safeguard, but it's not foolproof. Best practices, click this guy. Then we're going to click Redirect to a full URL. This is how it's going to automatically grant credit. Though we don't have the URL yet, we're going to go ahead and save it as such. And then we're going to publish our survey. We're going to publish it. And here is the survey link that it's going to give us. We'll come back to this screen in a minute. Now, we're going to begin the SONA portion of our training. So we're going to type in UA SONA Psych. We're going to go here. Now, if you're a new researcher or an incoming graduate student, you probably don't have a SONA account, so you will need to get an account created for you. You'll do this by emailing subject pool at Bama right here, and then the SONA coordinator will create you an account. I have an account, so I'm going to go in here. All right, so let's go to My Studies, is where we will see all of the different studies that we have worked on. All Studies lets us see all the studies in the subject pool. Add New Study and Pre-Screen Results. Pre-Screen Results is where you will see... you will be able to get some information about the pre-screen questions that are included by researchers. So this is where you would get pre-screen results. But let's add a new study today. I'll walk you through this. So it will be a standard study that participants will either be paid or receive credit for. They'll receive credit for my study. It's a multi-part standard study. That's incorrect, so I'm going to leave this blank. If it's a 2-part study, they need to come back twice, or 3 parts, we would deal with that here. An online survey study where the questions are set up in the system. That would be if this was done through some sort of SONA crafted survey, which our study is not. Instead, we did an online external study with something like Qualtrics or SurveyMonkey. So we're going to do credit here. And we're going to name this study what it's named on our IRB. So this is some of the IRBs that we use. So we'll name this guy this, although I'm going to have to change it because that's actually a study already. There we go. That seems inappropriate. 1. There we go. The brief abstract, this is optional. This will show to participants. So here I'm going to put participants will engage in fun research. And then I can provide a more detailed explanation here. Participants will engage in very fun research. Okay, so this is what participants will see when they choose to sign up for our study. The eligibility requirements, you can type some things in here. This is sort of a information to the participants. They will see it anyway, regardless of the system. So this perhaps isn't necessary to fill in here. The survey duration, our study is going to take 30 minutes that we just crafted. And the way this works is 30 minutes of an online survey is worth 0.5 credits. The SONA coordinator, if you have any questions about the amount of credits that an online versus an in-person study grants, rather than provide inaccurate information here, make sure we email the subject coordinator so that they can provide you the correct information. I do know that a 30-minute study receives, a 30-minute online survey receives 0.5 credits, and a 60-minute online survey receives 1 credit. Time slot usage, this is how many time slots you're allowed to collect with this survey. And then here you would assign multiple researchers. So if you want to have multiple people, perhaps your RAs or your entire research team to have access to this study on SONA, you would assign them here. Really, it's not necessary, but you could do that here. Here's where you'll type in your IRB approval code. Okay, and that'll be your IRB approval expiration date. Is this study approved? This will change once the SONA coordinator approves your study. And is it active? If it's inactive, participants cannot sign up for it. So I go ahead and activate it here, which means that when the SONA coordinator approves my study, it will be ready to collect data. Okay? Here's some sort of advanced screening questions that a lot of people may use to prevent or include people from participating in their studies. So they can participate in all of these studies or at least one of these studies here. So let's say we needed them to have participated in this guy before completing this study. We would select it here. Alternatively, if some of our studies would prevent, if some of our studies, participation in another one of our studies or another research team studies would potentially contaminate responses in this study I'm posting now, we would exclude people from participating in both of those studies here. So you can see I've prevented participation if they had already taken this study. So that's where you deal with these types of study-by-study exclusions right here. Also, you can make it so people have to be in a specific class to participate in your research. You can make it so they have to have a special password to begin your research. Is it a web-based study? Yes, we've already decided that. Should they be identified by only a random unique ID code? This is if you had some extreme confidentiality issues. This is rare, so most often your response here is going to be no. The study URL, we're going to put here, we're going to go back to Qualtrics, and we're going to copy this study URL. And we're going to put it in here. Notice, if this code is included in the URL, the system will replace that with a unique code for the participant to make it easier to identify who completed the study. Okay. Keep that in mind. The study URL display. After participants complete, can they still access the study? No. Should the researcher receive an email notification when they sign up or cancel? This is up to you. If you need to have detailed documentation of participants signing up or canceling, yes. Click yes here. If it helps you stay organized to manage your RAs that you need to be available, click yes here. Here's shared comments. These are comments that you can share between the researchers. If you were collaborating with someone that you needed to communicate with them through SONA, you would do it here. And here's where you put private comments. I always fill this private comment box with information that identifies the study for me, the researcher. So let's say that this is SONA, Qualtrics SONA test study. This information will not be presented participants. And is there a research alternative to this study? No. Of note, this doesn't mean that participants cannot complete the research alternative for their Psych 101 requirement. It just means that you, the researcher, have not crafted a specific alternative to supplant this study. That's all it means. So we're going to add this study. You must fill an IRB expiration date, which is not passed, of course. All right, we expire on August 14th. There we go. Okay, so now we are going to wait for approval from the SONA coordinator. Once the SONA coordinator approves this study, we can begin collecting participants. What's coming next is probably of critical import to most people that do survey research on SONA. We're going to scroll down to the section called Website. Here is where we get the automatically grant credit feature. Notice it says you can configure it so the participants automatically receive credit. If you're using Qualtrics, add this code to the end of the URL to make use of this feature. So we're going to copy this code right here and go back into our study information. So change study information. We'll scroll down to where we put the Qualtrics URL in, and we'll paste it at the end of the code. Now, after we accept and save changes, now SONA is prepared to automatically grant credit. However, there's one more function that needs to happen. We need to go to this Qualtrics redirect to a URL link right here underneath the website heading, copy it, and go back to our Qualtrics survey. Remember, under survey options, I said that we would come and deal with this later. Now, under survey options, go down to redirect to a full URL and paste that information in here. Now, Qualtrics and SONA are both ready to communicate with each other to automatically administer credit to participants. So SONA, Qualtrics is done. As good measure, I always publish again. This does not change the URL. This does nothing except update the changes that you've made. So you can make changes to studies while they're ongoing, although this may confound your IRB or it may confound your uncontaminated data. That's a decision for you as the researcher. It's important to note that if you notice a typo or if you need to add something quickly and you're going to take note of the new N in your Qualtrics survey, you can simply add it, republish it, and all of the links will automatically update. In fact, they don't change. So that's good to know. So what we're going to do now is log out of this, and we're going to log in the admin account and approve the study that just happened. Let's go get the study. What did we call it? Personality. Let's see if we can find it. There it is. We're going to go ahead and go approve this study. And you get an email for it if you want it. All right, so that study is now approved. We're going to log back into the researcher account. Okay, now we have an approved study that's ready to collect data. So we're going to go here, and it is ready to open time slots. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to View or Administer Time Slots, and we're going to add a time slot. Now, here, you can do this in a couple of ways. You could add individual time slots. If you needed to, let's say you were collecting data in person, and you needed a time slot that represented a portion of the day in which an RA was going to be available. You could do that here and update individual time slots. Instead, if you're using survey research, all you have to do is put in the final participation date, which we're going to say July 15th, the final participation time, which is 9 a.m., and how many participants you want to collect. Let's say 400. Done. So what this means now is that there's 400 time slots available, and it closes on July 15th at 9 a.m. Importantly, SONA will not allow you to make the end date a time that if a participant were to begin it at that time would bleed over past the final deadline for SONA participation. So for example, let's say final participation SONA grades were required at 8:45 a.m. on July 15th. It would have not let me make this the final participation time because an 8:45 begin time plus the 30-minute study time would bleed over past the final participation date for SONA. So if you get that error, pull back the final participation date so that it aligns with UA's final SONA participation time. All right. So that's what we have with time slots. And as participants sign up for the study, it will populate here. And it will either show that credit has been granted to them or credit has not been granted to them. If you use the automatically grant credit feature, it will say credit granted. If they have not automatically received credit, it will say awaiting action. Importantly to know, participants can sign up to take your study, which will then qualify them with an awaiting action code without having to go participate in your research yet. So just know that because this list populates does not mean that there will be that many responses in your Qualtrics survey. In fact, in practice, I've noticed that there's often a misalignment until you close the survey in Qualtrics and download the data. So as a reminder, just because participants have signed up does not mean they've completed your research. Finally, we can assign credit manually for these surveys, which we will do here. We will go to the administer time slots. We'll go to modify. Let's go. All signups would be here. So obviously we don't have any signups here. But if we did, all of the signups would be listed here. And then it will have uncredited signups here. Under the uncredited signups, I'm sorry that I don't have an example for this, but underneath this, you'll have all the people that have signed up to take your study, but have not received credit. And there'll be three options: excused absence, unexcused absence, and grant credit. You can either manually select one of those three options for everyone, or you can select a function that automatically denies or automatically grants credit to everybody. See right here, batch grant credit. So that will happen there. You can also communicate with individual participants through SONA here on this screen. You'll be able to send them emails directly. So that should be everything. That should be everything from setting up your Qualtrics account to creating a study to setting up your SONA account, posting that study, and granting credit with open time slots. I hope that this video serves some sort of function for you all, and I hope that it's been informative. If you have any extra questions, don't hesitate to reach out. I'll help you to the best of my ability. And other than that, make sure you stay safe, you stay healthy, and roll Tide.